What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Haunted Beard. Thank you for joining me today. Well, my last video, I did my top 10 favorite horror directors, currently working horror directors. And today I wanted to follow that up with something a little bit similar in talking about some lesser known, underrated, up-and-coming horror directors. And so wanted to hopefully maybe give you some new recommendations, new directors to look out for who are showing a bit of promise or need some more recognition. This isn't going to be a ranking or anything, it's just going to be more of like a straightforward list. But the first handful of directors are ones that have only had one feature film to their credit, but they are films that I thought were quite solid and showed quite a bit of promise. So with that being said, let's start the list. So the first director that I want to talk to you about is Rose Glass, and she made her feature film debut back in 2019 with Saint Maud. And Saint Maud was my favorite film of 2019. I thought it was just an incredible first effort. Heck, it would be an incredible veteran effort. I loved Saint Maud. I'm a big sucker for religious type horror, and Rose Glass showed a real talent and skill for writing character, and just her kind of presentation of the story I thought was just really compelling and interesting. The lead performance in that film, Morfydd Clark, I believe is how you pronounce her name, is really strong. And so kudos there to Rose Glass, just getting a really strong performance out of her lead actor and just really crafting a really kind of, I think, in-depth sort of character study, and just looking at some of the terrifying elements when our religious views can get really twisted and disturbed. And man, the ending in that film too is just really, really memorable. It's a great first effort. She has another film in development called Love Lies Bleeding, and this is described as a romantic thriller starring Kristen Stewart. So no release date for that one yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. It is on my list. So Rose Glass is somebody to keep an eye on. The next director I want to talk to you about is Mark OBrien, and he made his feature film debut last year with a film called The Righteous, and this is one that I think flew under the radar, that was very underrated, that I didn't hear hardly anybody talk about, but man, I thought it was just really impressive. This is another religious-themed horror film. Man, it's just really strong. Some really good writing. The black and white cinematography in it, I think, is just gorgeous. There's just a lot of really memorable and solid images in the film, and he also too just constructs a really interesting and kind of in-depth and layered story. There's kind of a lot of ambiguity to it as well, but just some really strong performances. I think some really solid writing and just a beautiful looking film. So he doesn't have anything scheduled as of right now, but Mark OBrien, another one. Keep your eyes on the lookout for this guy. Next up is Damian McCarthy. He made his feature film debut back in 2020 with a film called Caveat. This was a Shudder release and another kind of underrated one, but just a really solid effort. The visual presentation in this is just really effective. The vast majority of it takes place in one location, this really just creepy and eerie house. And the whole film is more of a kind of a slower paced moving film, but that is by no means a criticism. I think it suits the film quite well. The set design and just the production design of this house, it's very atmospheric. It's just very eerie. The whole thing just kind of has a very eerie and off-putting atmosphere to it. And also, too, it has a pretty well-constructed mystery. It tells the story of a lone drifter suffering from partial memory loss who accepts a job to look after a psychologically troubled woman in an abandoned house on an isolated island. Yeah, that synopsis just really hooked me in, and I'm really glad I watched it because I think it's just a really solid first effort. And Damian McCarthy has a film in development right now. We don't really know hardly anything about it other than its title. It's called Oddity, and it is a horror film, and that is all we know. But I'm excited. It's on my list, and I can't wait for it. Next up is Prano Bailey Bond. She is a Welsh director who made her debut back in 2021 with a film called Censor. This is another kind of underrated one that didn't get a whole lot of recognition, but man, I thought it was just another really solid first effort. Censor was in my top 10 of 2021. It is a horror mystery that tells the story of this woman by the name of Enid, who is a film censor who, after viewing a familiar video nasty, sets out to solve the past mystery of her sister's disappearance, embarking on a quest that dissolves the line between fiction and reality. And in addition to religious horror, I love horror that can bring any sort of element of mystery to it. And this one just has, I think, a really compelling mystery and also just some nice visual presentation to it as well. And one of the elements that I loved of this too is it has a bit of a historical aspect to it, as these, what were known as video nasties, are these selection of films that came out like back in the 70s and 80s that were heavily censored around the world. And so this woman has to go through and watch all these really disturbing and messed up, typically horror films, to go through to censor them, to figure out what's allowed to be shown and what isn't. And so there's just kind of this horror element aspect within this horror movie that I just really latched onto and thought was pretty great. Bailey Bond does have a film in development. It is called The Things We Lost in the Fire. That is all we know about it at this time. Don't even know if it's a horror film, but fingers crossed that it is. But either way, she shows a lot of talent and promise, so I will be keeping an eye out for her. So these next directors have at least 2 films to their name, if not more. But the first one I want to talk to you about is Andrew Semans, who made his debut back in 2012. I haven't seen his debut film, but I have to talk about him because he directed Resurrection, which was my favorite film of last year. I thought Resurrection was absolutely phenomenal, and I already know this guy has a way with actors because I thought Rebecca Hall's performance in that was just incredible. This is just a deeply kind of mysterious and psychological and twisted sort of horror story that I just absolutely loved. He also wrote the film as well, and so, I mean, this guy's just talented on multiple different fronts, and I just love the way that the story is structured. It's very mysterious and ambiguous, and it's just creepy and weird, and you're not entirely sure how to interpret things. But man, I just found so much in this to appreciate. I cannot wait to see what this guy does next. He doesn't have anything in development at the moment, but another one I will definitely be looking out for. Next up on my list is Panos Cosmatos, and he's one that's a little more well-known, but I still think hasn't quite kind of hit the mainstream level yet. He has 2 feature-length films to his name. First one is Beyond the Black Rainbow, which I still need to watch, but the other film is Mandy, which I absolutely loved. It was one of my favorite films of 2018, and it's one of my favorite horror films of all time, for that matter. He also directed an episode of Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, which I thought was pretty good as well, but Mandy is obviously the clear standout for me, as Panos just has an incredible visual style. His films are immediately recognizable just simply through his visual presentation, just these insane, intense, neon-soaked landscapes and visuals and everything. He has a film in development right now called Necrocosm, which is supposedly a sci-fi fantasy, which sounds all sorts of wild. I cannot wait for it, as Panos, man, is just somebody to watch out for. Just an incredible talent. Can't wait to see it. Next up is S. Craig Zahler, and he has 3 films to his name. The first up is Bone Tomahawk, which was like a very just dark and brutal sort of Western horror. There's not too many Western horror films out there, but Bone Tomahawk definitely was a memorable one. Stars Kurt Russell and Patrick Wilson, but I think Zahler's films have progressively gotten better. He followed that up in 2017 with Brawl and Cell Block 99, which is just another brutal, just, this one's more of a crime thriller, stars Vince Vaughn of all people, and just a great performance. And then in 2018, he followed that up with Dragged Across Concrete, which stars Mel Gibson, and again, Vince Vaughn. And I just love the way he films the violence in his movies. It's just very effective, very realistic, and just very memorable. And Dragged Across Concrete is another one that is just really a brutal crime thriller. Just really great stuff. I can't wait to see what he does next. Next up is Jim Cummings, and Jim Cummings also has 3 films to his credit. The first up was Thunder Road, which came out back in 2018. This was more of a comedy drama, which was decent, but then he followed up with 2 horror films. The first was The Wolf of Snow Hollow, which is kind of a darkly comedic take on a werewolf movie, which I quite enjoyed. And then 2021, he made The Beta Test, which was kind of a horror mystery thriller, but also kind of a dark comedy as well. It kind of is a bit of a dark comedic and almost satirical take on kind of the behind the scenes of Hollywood, of like Hollywood agents and things like that. In addition to directing all of these, he also wrote them and starred in them. So he's talented all the way around. I think his comedy is really good and also really unique. He just kind of has a unique voice that is really kind of makes him stand out. Nobody else is quite doing sort of what he's doing it and in the way that he is doing it. And so, yeah, Jim Cummings, he doesn't have any feature films in development at the moment, but this guy is pretty special, and I can't wait to see what he does next. Next up is Chloe Okuno, and Chloe Okuno kind of has like 1.5 movies to her name. Last year, she directed Watcher with Micah Monroe, and then a couple years ago, she directed a short film segment in VHS 94. That segment was Storm Drain, which is one of my all-time favorites. I think it's like my second or third favorite out of that entire franchise, and so I absolutely love Storm Drain. I think it is just a great kind of mixture and combination of all sorts of different wild stuff. It's great. A little bit of found footage, a little bit of creature features, just some really nice suspense, and just some weirdness in there as well. And then last year's Watcher, I didn't love it, but I still found quite a bit about it to appreciate and thought was just really effective. I really like just the visual presentation. The film sort of has this like pastel type color palette to it that was really pretty, and she has some just really solid suspenseful scenes and just is really good at kind of having this sort of slow burn, slow building suspense that is just really good and just really talented in executing those suspenseful scenes as well. And so she has a film in development. It's called Fear Street 4, which I can only assume is a continuation of the Fear Street trilogy that we just got a couple years back, which takes me to the next director that I want to talk about, and that is Leigh Janiak. I don't exactly know how to pronounce her name, but she has directed the Fear Street trilogy, and then also she made her debut back in 2014 with a film called Honeymoon, which I've seen, which is also pretty solid as well. But the Fear Street trilogy were some of my favorite films of 2021, and Janiak just did a great job with them. I thought the overall story was just really interesting and compelling, and I just like how distinct each one was. As 1994 kind of played into that sort of a 90s type horror film. Then you had 1978, which looked a whole lot like a Friday the 13th film, and just this slasher stuff from the 80s, which I thought was really great. And then the 1666 one, you kind of introduced a whole sort of supernatural witch element to it, demon stuff in it as well. So just completely different sort of styles and looks to all three of these films. And so I thought they all worked quite well. I had a good time with them. All right, 2 directors left. The next one I want to talk to you about is Nicolas Pesce, and he has 3 films to his credit. I've only seen 2 of them, but I've been impressed with both of them. The first film came out in 2016. It's called The Eyes of My Mother, and this is just a really kind of unique, it's a dark, twisted, kind of messed up story told in just very stark black and white with lots of just really memorable imagery. He followed that up in 2018 with Piercing, starring Christopher Abbott and Mia Wasikowska, which is another one that has some real sort of twisted relationship element to it. It's a horror kind of mystery thriller, just some weird sort of stuff, but really interesting. Reminded me a little bit of one of Abbott's latest films, Sanctuary, that I reviewed, that just came out earlier this year, that I quite enjoyed as well. And then he followed it up with the Grudge remake, which I never saw, but he does have a film in development right now. It is a horror film called Visitation. No release date yet, but it stars Olivia Cooke and also Alfie Allen. And this one seems to possibly have a bit of a religious element to it, as it tells the story of this 14-year-old girl who gets dropped off to live with these Catholic nuns. So yeah, sounds interesting. I'm looking forward to it. All right, final director on the list is Oz Perkins, and Perkins has 3 films to his credit. The first one is The Blackcoat's Daughter, which came out in 2017. This is my favorite film of his. I think this is just a fantastic movie. I love the way the story is structured. I think it's just really creepy and eerie, and just kind of a really interesting mystery as well. And he followed that up with I'm the Pretty Thing That Lives in This House and Gretel and Hansel. Gretel and Hansel is one of the most beautiful looking movies I've seen in quite some time. The thing with Perkins, though, is that his directing style, I think, is really effective, and his visuals are really impressive as well. But his last two films have been a little light and a little weak on the story for me personally. And so I'm hoping that he can just get a little bit stronger of a story underneath him for his next film, as he has a film in development right now that's scheduled to come out next year in 2024. That sounds all kinds of intriguing. It's called Long Legs, and it is a horror thriller starring the one and only Nicolas Cage and also Micah Monroe. And it tells the story of an FBI agent who is assigned to an unsolved serial killer case that takes unexpected turns, revealing evidence of the occult. I don't know about you, but that has me all kinds of excited. That sounds great. Great cast. I hope that it has just a little bit stronger of a story, because if it does, I think this thing is fixing to be something really, really awesome. So that concludes my list. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you got something out of that, and there was maybe some new ones in there that you weren't aware of or didn't know much about. Hit me up down in the comments, though. I'm sure you guys have some more to add to this list. Would love to hear from you down below. Let me know who you guys are looking out for and who you got your eye on. Would love to hear from you. So that's all I got for you. Like always, hit that subscribe button. It's all horror and thriller movie content here on my channel. And I'll see you next time on The Haunted Beard.